So, were you able to build such a website with ChatGPT? I started with this initial prompt, where I assigned a role, then set my goal for this prompt, and then added some crucial context to the prompt. The content of the 2 pages, for example, my name, that I'll provide an image of me called Max PNG, my past jobs, and so on. And I also added this extra information regarding the look and feel of this website. With that, when you send this kind of prompt to ChatGPT, it should go ahead and it should typically suggest that you might want to use HTML, CSS, and maybe JavaScript, though the latter should actually not be required for this site here. And then for me here, it also told me which files should be created. And of course, as you know, the exact output will very likely be different for you. It might have created totally different files for you, and it might have given you a totally different HTML code and so on. That really does depend on the prompt and also has some randomness built in. But here's the code it gave me and the list of files it gave me. And at some point, it stopped outputting code because it basically ran out of characters in its response. And as you learned earlier in the course, in such cases, you can type continue to make it continue, which here has the downside, though, that the code formatting is lost actually. But we'll get back to this later in the section, and I'll show you how you can ensure, or at least try to keep the code formatting. Here it lost it. And then, of course, I went ahead and I created all these files and I copied in the code, including that style code here, of course, which in my case also meant that I had to manually also add this missing code here at the end, like this. And with that, and with all those files saved and my custom image added here, I should have a first draft for this website. So for this solution for the exercise I gave you. Now, of course, it would be realistic to assume that you don't necessarily know how you can now view this website in a browser. Therefore, this would be a valid follow-up question, especially if you have absolutely no programming experience. And here in my case, ChatGPT then indeed informs me that I should create a folder and add all those files in that folder, including that image file, and that then I should open the index.html file with my preferred browser. Now here for me, if I now opened this project folder with those files in my regular Finder or on Windows in Windows Explorer, if I right click on this, indeed I can choose Open With and I can choose Google Chrome, just as suggested here by ChatGPT. And of course, again, you might have gotten a different output, but here I got these suggestions. So I'll follow them. And with that, that's the website I got. Now I can zoom in here, just so that it's a bit easier to see for you. And it generally has the content and also the look and feel I wanted. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is looking good. I would personally style it differently, but I have this navigation, which leads to these different pages. I have all the content I wanted on these pages. It even understood what CV stands for, and therefore I would say it did solve this exercise. Of course, typically though, you would continue working on that website and you would probably try to refine it with follow-up messages. For example, we might want that my image here is in the same line as this text here and that this text on the other hand should be a bit smaller. And we could of course try to achieve this by sending this follow-up message to ChatGPT. So now here I could then pick up those suggestions and update those parts in the code that are highlighted here. For example, this part here in index.html and this part here in the CSS file, which is actually not code I have to update, but instead simply new code I have to add there. And yeah, with that, I think technically it is in the same line and the text is smaller, but it's still not having the exact look I'd like it to have. The image should probably also be smaller. It should be to the left of that text. It should maybe be in a circle with some rounded corners around it. Things like that. So therefore, typically you would go back to ChatGPT, send another prompt with your changes, so with the changes you're requesting, and then once you got back that response, you would again update the code and see if the website looks good now. And if we're being honest, it still doesn't look that great. So therefore, we would continue with this iterative process. And you would draft another prompt describing all the things you should change. And you would wait for that new response to be generated to then, of course, also use that code and update your code again and again. It's always about this iterative process. And that's not uncommon. When using ChatGPT for development, it will always be such an iterative process where you continuously refine the final output and product. Especially if you have no programming experience, you always have to describe the kind of visual changes you want to have without being able to give more code-specific instructions, typically. Which, of course, is a problem, but on the other hand, you can still build something you would not be able to build at all without ChatGPT. And then again, take a look and continue improving it, and continue sending more messages until we're happy with the final output. In my experience, from playing around with ChatGPT and trying to use it as a non-developer, so without using my programming knowledge, you can achieve quite a lot with it, but you will typically hit some walls as your applications become more complex. This iterative refinement process works, but the more complex your requests become, the harder it is for ChatGPT to kind of fulfill them. In my experience, it often gives you responses which don't really do what you wanted it to do. And since you don't have that programming knowledge to give it more specific instructions that refer directly to specific code or that request specific code features or coding styles, building more complex applications can indeed become cumbersome.